Hello, Brantford. My name is Robert Williams. I'm a member of the consultant team working with the City of Brantford on a project called City Council Governance and Employment Status Review and Ward Boundary Review. We're currently in phase one of this project, dealing with council governance and employment status. So this presentation will help us think a little bit about the issues in this topic. The slide on the screen now shows you how you can be involved, because we do want your involvement. We like to gather any questions that we will answer, comments from you about the topics that we're dealing with. And there are 4 different approaches to take that are outlined on the slide here. LetsTalkBrantford.ca opens up a whole range of things, including background research reports and other material related to the review. There is a survey. Please take the survey and make sure your friends and neighbors are aware of that, so they can help us deal with the topics with the contribution of residents of Brantford. Ask the questions. Don't be afraid of that. We will give you some responses to those questions as we move along. So join the conversation. There is something called Let's Talk Brantford Forum, where you can find out what other people have been saying. And the other techniques are about how you can contribute to this review, either by sending a direct email through the clerk's office that will come to us, mailing a formal letter, or making a phone call where a customer service representative will help you or direct your call to the right place. So, what are we talking about in this particular discussion? The role of councillors. Is it a part-time or a full-time position? Councillors in Brantford have always been part-time, but there are pressures on that. While it's considered part-time, in some respects, it's becoming more and more onerous to perform this role. Part of this comes with the growth of the municipality. Brantford is much, much larger than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and as a result, councillors have much more to deal with in terms of making those decisions. And many of these decisions are much more complex than they used to be. The question of everything from road building to environmental matters around garbage collection, things that used to be pretty straightforward, are now intertwined with a whole range of other issues. And decision making is not nearly as straightforward and as simple as it was. There's also increasing time demands on councillors, not unimportantly because of the rise of social media. Councillors spending a lot of time dealing with concerns that in the old days, if you will, used to come if the councillor ended up at the supermarket and talked to a constituent or got a phone call. Now, in some cases, it seems to be 24/7. There are lots of things that are putting pressure on the workload of councillors that have a bearing on this particular topic. So the idea is maybe councillors should not simply be considered part-time people who do this as a kind of public service, as a kind of a glorified service club. There is much more expected of it. However, legally, there's no distinction between a part-time and a full-time councillor at the municipal level. The legislation simply says there are councillors, and that's as far as it goes. The difference is primarily around what expectations are there and how they're compensated, how they're paid. And we've already seen there are now changes in expectations, but the rate of pay has not necessarily matched that kind of change. The next slide shows, again, a bit of research that we've done. First thing to notice is that the idea of a full-time municipal councillor is really only the case in 3 municipalities in Ontario, the 3 largest, Toronto, Ottawa, and Hamilton. Beyond that, the other places on that list are these single-tier municipalities that essentially rely on part-time councillors. And we'll notice that the rate of pay varies considerably. Again, Brantford is in the mix there. It's perhaps a little higher than some, but not the highest. The compensation is, again, a local decision, but is related to expectations, and in many cases, this may not be an adequate compensation for the amount of time that councillors put in. This is, again, just for guidance. It's not part of our job to come down with a dollar figure, but to simply say, is that the right way to think about it? So what does the job look like? And we've made some of these points already, but the complexity of government activity and the expectation of residents do require an increased commitment of time and effort. You don't just turn up to a meeting every couple of weeks and that's it. There are many more things that are required of a councillor. And as well, because the kind of expectations, present councillors don't really reflect, if you will, the typical occupation of status of Brantford residents. This is not the kind of thing that you can do after a 9-to-5 job, for example. So it is an opportunity that is only open to some members of the community to pursue. There are often significant peaks in the workload. Budget season, for example, is a very big one. But often there are other unpredictable things that require a lot more commitment than a councillor might give in other times of the year. So it's not a steady kind of occupation, if I can call it that. Councillors also need to be available to constituents on short notice. Things happen. There is a water main break, or there's a problem of some kind that constituents would like their councillor to come and have a look at fairly quickly. There's also, as I mentioned before, the continuous social media activity, which also impinges on the time of a councillor. It's less than a full-time job. Nobody's saying that it's necessarily the only thing one would do, but on the other hand, it's very difficult to fit it in around a traditional 9-to-5, and for many people, given the amount of salary, it may be that doing another job is what they have to do to support their family and to maintain, if you will, a full professional life. So there's trade-offs to be made. I think one of the issues here is who can do it, and are they properly compensated? So the considerations we're asking you to think about is this a position that all eligible residents could happily take on? Maybe in the past you could run your hardware store and go sit on council at night, or you could be a teacher and do your council work after school. Those kinds of things are very difficult. And now, because of the things we talked about, not everyone can easily fit in the job. There are obviously costs. If one were to increase the compensation to councillors, there would be a dollar factor in there to raise that from the current level to something more approximating a full-time position. It also is fair to councillors. Are they really being compensated adequately, appropriately for the kind of commitments they are making? This is about, in part, attracting high-quality candidates, people who can, who have decided that they're willing to set aside their current occupational activity and to take this on. This is not always the case when it is such an imbalance between the amount of work and the compensation. It's also the question of whether, and it's not a direct linkage. We're not sure of the impact, but it may be that full-time status would attract other members of the population who are precluded from running for office in the current arrangement. So there are some cost implications, and that's again something we would consider more fully. But a large council, and that's part of that earlier discussion, is it still as large as it is now, or could it be reduced? But a large council paid at a part-time rate could cost a similar amount to a smaller council paid as full-time. So there is this balancing, and that's what the image is trying to say. How much of those things need to weigh off against one another, and why this topic, while it is in a sense separate from the others, may have some bearing on the other questions, or vice versa. A smaller council may make it the workload harder, but the need to pay some more. So those are parts of the considerations we're asking you to take on. As we gather information, we would want to try to provide more specific cost estimates when we report out on the end of this phase of the activity. So again, a reminder that we're asking you to think of the councillor's role as full-time or part-time, and if so, should they be paid accordingly? That's the purpose of this part of the discussion. And again, we have a number of ways for you to provide that information that we've referred to along the way. LetsTalkBrantford.ca, emails, letters, phone calls. Please give us some thoughts about these questions, why you think some of these topics or some of these questions should be answered one way or another. Not just a yes or no. Give us some insight into what you believe is best for your community around this question of how councillors are to be compensated in serving the City of Brantford. I'm going to turn things over to my colleague David Siegel for another discussion on another video to do with the ward system.